It's always such a joy to enjoy those intimate, sacred moments with each of you. Thank you for bringing your whole self to this altar and this divine fellowship table with God. We're in the middle of a series called Daringly Different. When I grew up, my parents always challenged me with this one thing, and as a kid, I rolled my eyes at it, but they said, "Lucas, don't be a dead fish." Well, no, thank you. I don't want to be a dead fish. That should be pretty easy to obey that. What they meant was a dead fish gets swept away by the current. A dead fish can't go against the flow. And we're talking about being daringly different. It means that a Christian can't be a dead fish in today's world. We just get swept away. No, Christians are designed by God to be daringly different from the entire world around us. And if there isn't a distinctive in your life, well, it's time for self-examination and go, what changes do I need to have a distinctive, to be set apart, to be contrast from the world? Because if everything looks the same, well, then we may not be living up to our calling as believers. So what are those distinctives? That's what we've been exploring and diving deeper into. And today, the theme is loving beyond yourself. It would have been a crime if I did a series on being daringly different and didn't include the second greatest commandment, which God gave us. Jesus says in Matthew 22, the greatest commandment, when questioned, he said, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, all of who you are. And the second is just like it, to love others as yourself. You know, I really could have titled this sermon, I Am Third, instead of loving beyond self. Because God says it's God first, it's others second, and then, oh man, I'm third? Yeah, my flesh is already complaining about it. We don't like to be second. We don't even like to be third. No, we want to be first. Our flesh wants to be promoted. We want to be ahead. And if I have to step on some necks on the way there, well then so be it. No, the way of the world, the way of the current, the way of the flesh isn't to love others first, it's to love self first, to put myself first. But that's not what Jesus commands us. No, instead it's loving your neighbor. And although I could have landed on the Good Samaritan, I tried to stay away from that story that is very often used in the theme of loving your neighbor. I'm trying to take a little bit of different angle on it for us this morning in the short time that we have left. I spoke at a conference once with the author of a book called The Art of Neighboring. And in The Art of Neighboring, these two co-authors, Jay Pathak and Dave Runyon, talk about how we've lost in our suburban makeup the ability to sometimes even know our neighbor's name. I mean, they may live 10 feet from us, and do we actually know their name, their profession, where they're from, like anything about them? That may not be, you may not be guilty of that, but some of us might be. Do we even know them? And the book is a call to deeper knowledge. It opens up with this picture of HGTV homes shows where they're house hunting. You ever watch one of those shows where people they want that perfect home in the new city that they're moving to? And 95% of the show is focused on the inside of the home and the outside of the home. But very rarely is in the complex web of decision-making, it's really just about the house and the budget. They don't often factor in who's going to be living right next door to you. We sometimes have this blind spot to our literal neighbors. And yet Jesus' command is to love your neighbor. Of course, your literal neighbor, but neighbor means your common man, your fellow man, anybody that you come into sphere with, to love them. But what kind of love? That's why I chose 1 Corinthians 13 as one of the readings for today. Often it's read in this sacred space at weddings. You know, you don't often hear that one on church service, on Sunday morning. So I loved hearing that read out loud by Dale as part of our Sunday morning worship, describing what love actually looks like. So when Jesus says, love others, we have an understanding of what that actually looks like and what it means. Because love for you could mean very different than love for me. What is God's definition of love? Well, according to 1 Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind, Love does not keep a record of wrongs. Love hopes all things, believes all things. Love is hoping for the best in the other person, never quitting. That's God's definition of love that was read for us. This is the standard at which he says, now go and live this brand of love out in the world. Go and do it in my name. And here come the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They're challenging Jesus. And you have to understand, Matthew 22 is after a long line of their peppering him with theological and legal questions about how should we interpret this thing. And they weren't genuine questionnaires. They were really trying to trick him. They were trying to trap him. They were trying to turn public opinion against him. And so here come the Pharisees after he silenced the Sadducees, and they ask their own question. Pharisees and Sadducees were very similar, by the way. There were more Pharisees than Sadducees. Josephus, the historian, estimates that there were about 6,000 Pharisees. That's a lot. Sadducees were a little bit of a higher class, and they had some theological differences, still under Judaism, but it's the minimization, but two different sects or denominations, if you will, within the same religion and same people. And the biggest difference being that the Sadducees, they had a hard time with the supernatural and the afterlife and resurrection, and the Pharisees believed that there was a resurrection in the afterlife. But regardless of their differences, they both had a lot of political, social, and religious power, and that's what they liked. They liked having power and influence. That's where they operated best. And so their questions to Jesus were coming out of their paradigm of power. They check all the boxes of morality, and you follow all these laws, and the second tier of laws, and the third tier of laws, and you check all the boxes, well, then you become a good standing person before a righteous God. And it's interesting that Jesus' answer brings them into a whole nother paradigm. They're over here in the paradigm of power struggle, care about. And Jesus takes them completely out of that. By the way, we have a lot of leaders that are stuck in the power struggle paradigm today, which is the way of the world, which is the way of the current. A lot of today's critical theories, which in commonplace language are just called woke ideologies, it's always the power struggle between the oppressed and the oppressor, and who is going to have the most power, and how can we take power from one and make things more even. It's a power struggle. Who's going to have the most influence? And here comes Jesus and says, guess what? It's not about the power struggle, because I have all the power anyway, so stop trying to grapple for it. My kingdom against the flow is all about love. His first response to these dudes who were all about the influence and the social, political, and theological power, he says, the most important thing you could do is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, which is quoting the Shema, which is a daily prayer that the Israel Hebrew people would do. He said, do you already know this? It's to love the Lord your God. If my kids come at me and said, hey, Daddy, of all the rules you gave me, which one's the most important? Clean my room, close the front door. We keep a very high standard at our house. Wash the dishes. What of those three, if I only had to do one today, which of the three should I do, Dad? Well, my response would be, the most important rule I've given you is to love and respect your father and mother. Because I know that if they love and respect me, they will do all the other things that I've asked them to do. Everything else falls into place. You see, love doesn't make it about a list of hierarchical things. Therefore, loving my brother, loving my neighbor, loving the other beyond self is not out of duty. It's not a have to, it's a get to. Because it honors my Father in heaven. It honors him who has sent me to do those things. What sort of brand of love is this? It's not a power struggle, it's a give. And as we dive into the person of Jesus, we understand that he didn't just make the declaration, he then also showed us how to do it. He then lived a way that it made it so natural. Friends, loving the other has to start at home first. You can't go out there and be loving to the other neighbors and everybody out there if you have left at home a void that needs to yet be filled. What kind of spouse are you? Are you a joy to live with? I see some more elbows coming. Are you loving beyond yourself at home first? Are you coming up with creative ways to be a blessing to your children? To get out of the rut of life that just kind of always happens. We get in our rhythms and our patterns, don't we? And we don't stop to go, oh my goodness, I need to take a step back, and how can I be loving and hospitable at my home first? I have lots of couples that I counsel through premarital counseling. And I always encourage them, assume the best in the other person, even when they're frustrating you. Marriage can frustrate you like nothing else in this life. Am I right? That and teaching an 11-year-old how to golf. That's also very, very frustrating. The people closest to us can frustrate us more than anybody else. But it's there that we have to learn how to love beyond self first. Yes, in marriage, in familial relationships. Do you hear about the husband and wife who were having this conflict, and the husband says, I always am the one yelling and fighting, and when we get in an argument, I'm the one that's upset, and you don't really ever yell back at me, but how do you resolve conflict inside? She's like, the wife says, well, I just go and I start cleaning toilets. And the husband says, what? Why? How does cleaning toilets help you with our conflict? And she says, well, I just use your toothbrush. That's the way of the world. That's the, you got me and I'm going to get you back. That's dead fish territory, right? No, what does love look like according to 1 Corinthians 13? Love does not keep a record of wrongs. Love forgives all things. Love lets it go. Even though I was wronged and it was unjust, we let it go. We believe all things. We hope all things. That's where we begin to love beyond ourselves. And guess what? Our church family is sort of the next ring of that onion. Galatians 6:9-10 says, let us not become weary in doing good. Listen to what Paul says. For at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, listen, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Paul knew that the people you're closest to, whether it be your family or your church family, they're the ones that can make the most amount of sparks. And yes, church drama is a real thing. Yeah, I've only been here 6 months, but that's enough time to experience a little bit of church drama. Hey, sometimes we're really good at majoring on the minors. It's true. We need to give each other grace, though. We need to remember that the enemy would love nothing more than for us to get myopically focused on little things that don't really matter that much with our family or with our church family, and then the real mission suffers because we're over here arguing about who knows what. This loving beyond self is really so often a call to forgiveness, a call to let go. Sound like a theme we recently talked about, daring forgiveness. Loving beyond self, then, when it's done at home and when it's done in your church family, it has this nuclear compounding pressure effect and just spills out into the community around you. I wonder if you went home this week and identified 1, 2, maybe 3 neighbors literally in your neighborhood who you don't know, and you reached out to, and you tried to meet a need that was there. Not taking the mentality of somebody else will take care of it. No, you take care of it. What if you took on that loving self attitude that was unreasonable? I'm reading a book right now called Unreasonable Hospitality. It was written by Will Guidara. He was the guy that took 11 Madison Park to #1 restaurant in the world. And it tells you his story of how they got to that point. He tells us a fantastic story about one night there was a family of 4 that was eating dinner at the restaurant. They're from Spain. And they were culminating their big New York City adventure with eating at their restaurant, and then they were going to go home the next day. But the kids could barely stay in their seats because outside the window, something magical was happening. Snow was falling. And they had never seen snow before. And as they were dining, Will and his staff, they went out to the store and bought 4 sleds. And as the family finished dinner, said, hey, we have organized a private chauffeured SUV with 4 sleds in the back. We're taking you to Central Park, and you guys are just going to get to go sledding for a little while before y'all get home. How does that sound? And they couldn't believe it. It was unnecessary, unreasonably hospitable. There was no addition to his bottom line. In fact, it probably cost him so much money. It came at great personal cost to go above and beyond to love the other, to serve and to bless. And this is what Jesus' life looked like. He did it effortlessly, though, as he walked, right? This was just part of his life. He was blessing, giving, healing, all of his life, and it came at personal cost. And he was not willing to stay removed. In fact, he was willing to get his hands dirty. And I'll close with this story. He was willing to get his hands dirty, and there was no task that was beneath him, down to washing his disciples' feet. Reminds me of a story I just recently heard. Thea and I have a mutual friend. His name's David Nasser. And he came here as a kid. They were Iranian refugees. And his dad was an Iranian military man. This is a Muslim family. And one day, a group of church members, not unlike ours, went to his restaurant to eat. And the service was really poor that day. And instead of looking at their watches or taking out their phones and giving a 1-star Yelp review, they said, you know what? This man is short-staffed. Let's help him out a little bit. And so they actually stood up and started helping. Instead of complaining and leaving and telling all their friends to never go to that place, they started bussing tables and helping out and saying, what can I do? I'm not going to wait for someone else to meet the need. I see a need. I'm going to meet it right now. Loving beyond self. David Nasser's dad couldn't believe it. What are these crazy people bussing my tables? This is weird. The next day they came back, continued to help some more. You believe that he was blown away. Yes, these Christians were uncommonly, daringly kind, daringly hospitable, going out of their way. And they invited him to choir practice. Can you imagine an Iranian military man walking into Debbie's choir practice? He didn't even know if he could sing or not, but he showed up. Why? Because these people's kindness was magnetic. He has drawn into it. You know, Romans 2 says it's God's kindness that leads to repentance. God's kindness through his people today can lead to repentance of those that are lost. They passed around a volunteer sheet, and they said, every one of you are volunteering at this man's restaurant this week. They all signed up. They all showed up. Do you know that this man's son, David Nasser, turned out to be a strong apologist for the gospel? He would write books and speak. In fact, he spoke at the Gathering Place main event once 10 years ago. He became the senior VP of student development at Liberty University. He had me up to speak at one of their convocations one time. He's now the president of a Christian foundation, giving away so much money to propel God's kingdom. That moment of generosity, of loving their neighbor, turned into a family meeting Jesus that then rippled into who knows how many people that were impacted. Loving your neighbor can be used by God so mightily in ways that you can't even imagine. The second greatest commandment, yes, it matters. It starts at home first. It starts at our home church second, and then it spills out naturally into your neighborhood, into the community, and beyond. And we become an echo to the way that Jesus lived. But you know what? Normal echoes, they get softer. But the echo of Christ gets stronger because every year we multiply more believers and there's that many more voices being added to the echo. So when you walk into the second greatest commandment to love others beyond yourself, you are joining a great, great echo of the love of Christ. What could be greater?